Before we begin, do you have a theory about this case or a story of your own? Leave a message on our socials. Our handles are all just Nightwatch Files without the space, or head over to nightwatchfiles.com to find them all in one place. Your insights might be featured in a future episode. I'm Harper Finley, and this is Nightwatch Files. On the night of November 12, 2022, 4 University of Idaho students did what college seniors do on a Saturday night in a small university town. They went out, they had drinks with friends, they stopped at a late-night food truck on Main Street. They caught a ride home in the early hours of the morning, went to bed, and fell asleep. By the following afternoon, all 4 of them were dead. They were stabbed to death in their beds in a rental house just off the university's eastern perimeter, while 2 of their roommates slept on the floor below, undisturbed, unaware, behind closed doors. The killer entered through a back door with a broken lock. He was inside the house for approximately 15 minutes. He left no weapon, no fingerprints, and no immediate trace of who he was or where he had gone. By the time the first police officer arrived on scene, he had been gone for hours. What he did leave behind, resting quietly beside one of the bodies on the 3rd floor, in a detail that would not become public for weeks, was a single tan leather knife sheath. It was, investigators would later conclude, the only mistake he made, and it would take 6 weeks, a cross-country surveillance operation, a cutting-edge DNA technique, and one of the most scrutinized criminal investigations in recent American memory to prove it. In a town that had never needed to lock its doors, where students had always moved through the night with the easy confidence of people who have never had reason to be afraid, the murders at 1122 King Road shattered something that could not be put back together. An entire community locked itself inside. Students fled. Neighbors who had lived side by side for decades began eyeing each other with quiet suspicion, asking a question that no one in Moscow had ever had cause to ask before. Was the person who did this still among them? The answer, it would turn out, was more disturbing than anyone had imagined, and closer than anyone had thought to look. Moscow, Idaho, represents a highly specialized evolution of a rural town where municipal goals have seamlessly merged with the institutional objectives of the University of Idaho, or UI. Since being selected as the site for the state's land-grant university in 1889, Moscow has transformed from an agricultural trading outpost into a sophisticated hub of education and research. Today, it is defined by a deliberately cultivated, quiet college town paradigm that shapes its economy, demographics, and daily life. The University of Idaho is the central nervous system of Moscow, insulating the community from national economic fluctuations. UI-related spending supports roughly 50% of the local economy, and the university and medical sectors directly account for 1 out of every 3 jobs in the city. Because of the massive influx of students, Moscow boasts a youthful, vibrant population with a median age of 30.7. The heavy concentration of academics means approximately 50% of residents aged 25 and older hold a bachelor's degree or higher, nearly double the rate of many other rural Idaho communities, which drives the town's progressive political leanings and cultural institutions. Moscow's quiet reputation is enforced by rigorous municipal legislation. The city maintains a comprehensive noise ordinance that designates quiet hours between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., capping decibel levels to ensure an acoustic environment conducive to study and rest. It is also historically a sanctuary of high public safety. Moscow consistently ranks among the top 25 safest cities in Idaho, with a violent crime rate that has recently hovered around 82% lower than the national average. To the students who live there, The university's Greek row feels small, bucolic, and reminiscent of a private school. Moscow bridges the town and gown divide through rich cultural traditions, such as a Saturday farmers market that draws 266,000 annual visitors and the Lionel Hampton Jazz Festival, which brings thousands of students to the city every February. When compared to neighboring Pullman, Washington, home to Washington State University, or regional peers like Bozeman and Missoula, Moscow is distinctly preferred as the quieter and more adult option. While Pullman offers a fast-paced undergraduate energy, Moscow is known for its artsy, laid-back vibe, historic preservation, and a charming downtown that feels like a permanent home rather than a transient student camp. Kaylee Goncalves and Madison Mogen were look-alike blondes and inseparable best friends who grew up in the neighboring Idaho towns of Rathdrum and Coeur d'Alene. They had been best friends since they were 12 years old, sharing everything from summer boat rides in winter hot springs to beach vacations in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, never spending more than a few days apart. Their personalities and home lives offered a unique balance. Maddie was a girly girl and an only child who came from a quiet home. Kaylee, by contrast, was an extrovert, a bit of a hustler, and a former tomboy who grew up in a vast, loud, and hectic family with 4 siblings. Maddie was so ingrained in the Goncalves family that she would enter their house without knocking, treated entirely as one of their own. In August 2019, the girls enrolled as freshmen at UI, drawn specifically to its strong Greek life. During sorority rush, both girls desperately wanted to get into the top-tier Alpha Phi or A Phi house. However, on bid day, their paths diverged. Kaylee was accepted into A Phi, while Maddie opened her envelope to discover she was placed in Pi Beta Phi, or Pi Phi, a respectable but less prestigious house. Maddie was crushed and brought to tears by the separation, having learned that UI sororities often separated close friends to force them to build new networks. Showing maturity, the two decided to play the game of Greek life, maintaining an illusion of separateness on social media by posting photos exclusively with their new sorority sisters, while privately remaining as close as ever. Maddie, who was a talented photographer and model, ended up running the official Pi Phi Instagram account, successfully elevating the house's profile and attracting new recruits. When the COVID-19 pandemic forced UI to go remote in March 2020, Maddie and Kaylee moved back to their hometowns and dropped the social media pretense, celebrating Maddie's birthday, known as Maddie May Day, with photos together by the lake. Kaylee grew increasingly frustrated with her sorority during the pandemic. Raised in a libertarian family that questioned the severity of the virus, she was angered by having to pay expensive resident dues for an A Phi house she wasn't allowed to occupy. When she did return, she despised the mandatory quarantine protocols and felt the stress was bringing out a nightmare version of Mean Girls within A Phi. Despite this, Kaylee was a fiercely protective mentor to her younger sorority sisters, known as a girl you don't mess with, who would immediately confront anyone being rude to her friends. Both women had strong career aspirations and serious boyfriends. Maddie wanted a career in marketing. On Valentine's Day 2021, after being pursued for over a year, she officially began dating Jake Schrieger, a handsome upperclassman in the Delta Tau Delta fraternity. Maddie became deeply committed to Jake, viewing him as her future and planning to move to Boise after graduation to be with him. Kaylee was pursuing a career in IT, mirroring her father and brother. She landed a highly successful internship that turned into a full-time job at Extreme Networks in Austin, Texas, earning company-wide praise for her pitch videos. For years, she dated Jack Ducour, a kind and quiet fraternity brother she had known since middle school. They lived in nearby off-campus apartments and shared custody of a golden doodle named Murphy. Eventually, Kaylee initiated a breakup, not out of animosity, but because she wanted to assert her independence and experience the world before moving to Texas, though she still loved Jack and relied on him. Tired of the strict rules of their respective sorority houses, the girls sought off-campus freedom. Maddie eventually took over the lease of 1122 King Road, a 3-story house with a great party deck, from graduating Pi Phi sisters. In June 2022, ahead of their senior year, the best friend's long-held dream finally came true. Kaylee moved her boxes into 1122 King Road. The two lifelong friends were finally living together under one roof, alongside their roommates Xana Kernodle, Dylan Mortensen, and Bethany Funk. Xana Kernodle grew up in Post Falls, Idaho, and faced a difficult home life from a young age. Her mother, Kara, battled severe drug addiction and gave up custody of Xana and her older sister, Jasmine, in 2006. Xana was raised by her father, Jeff, but because he traveled frequently for work, the two girls were often left on their own. Despite a hardscrabble upbringing that left her with few clothes and mismatched bedding, Xana was famously resilient, deeply energetic, and unafraid of anyone. When she arrived as a freshman at UI in September 2020, she joined the Pi Beta Phi sorority and introduced herself by joking, "I'm Xana," pronounced Xanax, without the X, instantly winning people over with her humor. She grew incredibly close to her sorority sister, Emily Allant, whose parents, Matt and Karen, effectively adopted Xana as a second daughter, hosting her during winter breaks when her father was away or living in Arizona. By the fall of 2021, Xana and Emily moved into a notoriously fun off-campus house nicknamed the Shark Tank at 1118 King Road. Xana became the life of the party, acting as DJ Xan and hosting the most frequent and lively gatherings at UI. Ethan Chapin was a triplet, raised alongside his brother, Hunter, and sister Maisie, in a highly supportive, tight-knit family in Mount Vernon, Washington. His parents, Jim and Stacy, a former school principal, gave the triplets an idyllic upbringing, spending their summers at a family home on Priest Lake in Idaho. Standing 6'4", Ethan was a gentle giant and a superb athlete who played varsity basketball, golfed, and was a dominant presence on the sand volleyball court. In August 2021, the inseparable Chapin triplets enrolled at UI, having chosen it over Washington State University because UI's Greek row felt smaller and more like a private school. During fraternity rush, Ethan briefly considered joining Phi Delta Theta, but ultimately chose Sigma Chi, the premier house for athletic students, knowing that wherever he went, his brother Hunter would follow. Ethan and Xana met on October 3, 2021, when a group of freshman Sigma Chi brothers was invited to the Shark Tank to play a party game called Champagne Shackles. Though Xana was zip-tied to another man for the game, Ethan was completely smitten by her effortless magnetism, deciding she was the most real person he's ever met. Ethan soon began trekking across the field between his fraternity and her house, carrying his massive stereo on his shoulder so Xana could DJ their parties. He even asked Xana to be his Greek big, and by early 2022, it was unclear if Ethan actually slept at his fraternity house or if he had practically moved into Xana's room. In April 2022, Xana excitedly confirmed to Emily's mother that she and Ethan were officially a couple, noting that it had happened naturally. During the summer of 2022, Xana essentially lived with the Chapins at Priest Lake, where they warmly welcomed her as one of their own. Experiencing the Chapins' stable, easygoing family dynamic profoundly impacted Xana. She decided she wanted to move past her free-spirited party girl reputation, become someone who was taken more seriously, and ultimately grow old with Ethan. Ahead of the fall 2022 semester, Xana moved into a main-floor bedroom at a new rental house at 1122 King Road with her friends. Meanwhile, because Ethan's grades had slipped below a 2.75 GPA, he was temporarily barred from living in the Sigma Chi fraternity house, and his parents rented him an off-campus apartment in Moscow. However, Ethan rarely slept at his own apartment, instead serving as the constant, honorary roommate alongside Xana at the King Road house. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The residence at 1122 King Road was a 3-story house situated just off campus, sitting up on a hill like a finger. The home's layout included a living room, a kitchen, and bedrooms on the main level, such as the one occupied by Xana Kernodle, and a top floor that housed the bedrooms of Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves. The lower-level bedrooms were occupied by roommates Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. The walls of the house were notoriously paper-thin, allowing residents to easily hear conversations in the living room or the familiar sound of footsteps stomping up the stairs. The home was a vibrant social hub for University of Idaho students, particularly those involved in Greek life. With a large back deck, 1122 King Road became a well-known campus fixture and a party house where friends constantly gathered to relax, drink, and socialize. Because of this lively, open-door atmosphere, it was completely normal for people to pop in and out of the residence at all hours of the night, even as late as 4 a.m. Contributing to this highly accessible environment was the home's back sliding glass door, located by the kitchen. The lock on this sliding door was broken, a fact that was widely known among the roommates' friends and even their parents. To get inside without the front door code, visitors simply had to lift the broken mechanism to release the sliding door and walk right in. Beyond their Greek life and shared vacations, Kaylee and Maddie cultivated their own distinct family traditions and professional work ethics. Kaylee hosted family breakfasts, where she cooked stacks of pancakes in her apartment for her closest friends. She paid her own way for a $300 a week gym and meal plan using tips earned from her job at the local Mexican restaurant, La Casa Lopez, and her IT work, which recently allowed her to purchase a new Range Rover. Kaylee also remained incredibly close with her older sister, Olivia, who helped her rehearse the corporate jargon for her IT pitches, and her younger sisters, Autumn and Aubrey. Maddie took a job waitressing at a vegan-friendly restaurant, the Mad Greek, where she made $80 a shift and was asked by the manager to redesign the restaurant's website. When she wasn't working or studying, Maddie spent time crafting, including making a small quilt for a baby. She maintained a tight bond with her mother, Karen, her stepfather, Scott, and her paternal grandmother, Kim Cheeley, whom she affectionately called Deedle. Xana idolized her older sister, Jasmine, a student at nearby Washington State University. Xana frequently visited Jasmine's dorm, using her best friend Emily to distract her sister so Xana could filch shirts from Jasmine's closet. Following Maddie's suggestion, Xana eventually joined her working at the Mad Greek restaurant. She proudly used her summer savings to open her very first bank account and buy a wall mirror for her bedroom. Xana was willing to make a fool of herself to put others at ease. When she tried playing golf with Ethan's athletic family for the first time, she found it frustratingly difficult, hilariously threw her club, and simply took a swig of her drink. However, Xana's desire to mature beyond her carefree party girl persona crystallized during the summer of 2022, when she tripped and chipped her front tooth after drinking too many White Claws on a boat, tearfully confessing that she didn't want to be that person anymore. Within his triplet dynamic, Ethan was the undisputed leader. He always entered a room or a contest one step ahead of his brother Hunter, but always kept his hand stretched out to pull his brother along. Though Ethan made the varsity basketball team as a freshman, the COVID-19 pandemic deprived him of the crucial competitive seasons needed to prepare him for college-level play. Instead, he channeled his athletic drive into summer days at Priest Lake, where he worked as a server at Hills Resort. He and Hunter would spend their early mornings wakeboarding on the lake before sprinting barefoot to the dock with only 5 minutes to spare before their shifts began. Ethan lived for organizing highly competitive sand volleyball games outside the resort, particularly relishing matchups against the 6 children of the neighboring Xylac family. Recently, Ethan had even grown a mustache, simply because he watched the new Top Gun movie and wanted to look just like the pilots playing sand volleyball. On the evening of November 12th, 1122 King Road's occupants and their guests were out in the community. Xana and Ethan, who was staying as a guest for the night, spent time at the Sigma Chi fraternity house located at 735 Nez Perce Drive, a short walk away. They arrived around 8 p.m. and stayed until 9 p.m. Around midnight, Xana spoke to her father on the phone, telling him that she was at home watching television. Ultimately, Xana and Ethan formally returned to the King Road house at 1:45 a.m. Madison Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves spent the majority of their evening in the commercial downtown district of Moscow. The two women were patrons at the Corner Club, a popular local bar situated at 202 North Main Street, between approximately 10 p.m. on November 12th and 1:30 a.m. on November 13th. Upon departing the Corner Club, Mogen and Goncalves transitioned to a late-night food vendor known locally as the Grub Truck, located at 318 South Main Street. Following their interaction at the Grub Truck, Mogen and Goncalves utilized a private driver rather than a commercial rideshare service to secure transportation back to their off-campus residence. Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk both had been out in the Moscow community separately during the evening of November 12th. They had returned to the King Road residence by approximately 1 a.m. on November 13th. Following their return, they retired to their respective bedrooms on the first and second floors and went to sleep. By 2 a.m., all 6 individuals, Madison, Kaylee, Xana, Ethan, Dylan, and Bethany, were inside the home. Between 2 a.m. and 3 a.m., Madison and Kaylee were awake together in Madison's third-floor bedroom. During this hour, they initiated a rapid series of phone calls to a friend, Jack Ducour. Jack was the longtime boyfriend and recently ex-boyfriend of Kaylee Goncalves. Jack and Kaylee had been dating since middle school, and Jack chose to attend the University of Idaho, largely to be with her. He was a member of the Beta Theta Pi fraternity, an Idaho all-state tennis player, and is described as having strawberry blonde hair, freckles, and a quiet, calm, and sweet demeanor that contrasted with Kaylee's effervescent personality. Despite the recent breakup, they remained very close, and Jack regularly stopped by the King Road house because they shared custody of a golden doodle named Murphy. Kaylee's family and friends noted that Jack remained incredibly kind and gentle even after they split, and Kaylee still loved him. Jack lived in an off-campus house just 3 doors down from the 1122 King Road residence. In the early hours of November 13th, a heavily intoxicated Kaylee missed Jack and wanted him to come over. Between 2:26 a.m. and 2:52 a.m., Kaylee and Maddie called Jack's phone a total of 10 times. Down on the second floor, Xana was also awake. She ordered food via the DoorDash app, and the delivery driver dropped the food off at the house at exactly 4 a.m. She remained awake, eating and using the TikTok application on her phone. Around 4 a.m., Dylan woke up in her second-floor bedroom to sounds coming from the third floor. Initially, she assumed Kaylee was playing with her dog. Shortly after, Dylan heard a female voice say, "There's someone here." Dylan opened her bedroom door to check the hallway, but saw nothing. She closed her door, only to open it a second time when she heard what sounded like crying coming from Xana's room down the hall. Accompanying the crying, Dylan heard a male voice reassuringly say, "It's okay, I'm going to help you." When Dylan opened her door for a third time, she saw a male figure standing 5 feet 10 inches or taller, athletically built with bushy eyebrows. He was dressed entirely in black clothing, with a mask covering his nose and mouth. The man walked directly past her and headed toward the rear sliding glass door. Frozen in shock, Dylan retreated and locked herself inside her bedroom. Inside the house, a frantic text exchange began. Dylan texted Bethany on the first floor, saying, "No one is answering, and I'm really confused right now." Bethany replied, Xana was wearing all black, but Dylan corrected her, describing the man she had just seen. "No, it's like a ski mask almost, like he had something over his forehead and mouth." "Bethany, I'm not kidding. I am so freaked out." Bethany replied, "So am I. Come to my room. Run. Down here." Dylan left her second-floor room and ran down the stairs. On her way, she noticed Xana lying on the floor of her bedroom, with her head toward the wall and her feet toward the door. In the dim light and confusion, Dylan assumed Xana was simply drunk and continued running down to the first floor. Once inside Bethany's room, the two women locked the door and made several more unanswered phone calls to the others. At 4:32 a.m., Dylan sent one final text message to Kaylee. Please answer. Dylan and Bethany eventually fell asleep and did not wake up again until later that morning. They were still unable to reach Madison, Kaylee, Xana, or Ethan. Operating under the belief that someone had simply passed out from the previous night and was not waking up, they called a group of friends to come over to the house. Among the friends who arrived were Hunter Johnson, the best friend of Ethan Chapin, Emily Allant, and Josie Lauder. Before arriving, Hunter had been joking on the phone with one of the roommates, fully expecting a routine situation, and showed up casually dressed in shorts and slides. However, the atmosphere shifted the moment they walked inside. Josie later described an immediate, palpable feeling of dread, noting that something felt so not right. Hunter walked further into the second floor and looked into Xana's bedroom, discovering Xana and Ethan Chapin lifeless and covered in blood. Operating on pure adrenaline and a strong protective instinct, Hunter immediately retreated downstairs and instructed Dylan and Bethany to call 911 and wait outside. He then went to the kitchen to grab a knife for protection and headed back upstairs. When his girlfriend, Emily, arrived and started up the stairs behind him, Hunter stopped her in her tracks, telling her softly, "Emily, I don't think Xana's going to wake up," purposely shielding her from the gruesome scene. Outside, the situation devolved into pure panic. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. The phone was passed among the deeply distressed group because Bethany and Dylan were crying too hysterically to speak intelligibly to the 911 operator. Josie took the phone, attempting to explain that a roommate who had been drinking the night before was passed out and not waking up, and she briefly blurted out that the girls had seen a man in the house the previous night. When Dylan took the phone back to elaborate on the masked figure she had seen at 4 a.m., the dispatcher cut her off, needing to focus entirely on the immediate medical emergency of whether the unconscious person was breathing. Hunter, who had been inside checking his friend's pulses, came outside and took the phone. When the operator asked if the victim was breathing, Hunter calmly replied, "No." The operator's subsequent request for the friends to find a defibrillator only added to their helpless confusion, as none of them knew where one was. They waited huddled together on the sidewalk in their nightwear, freezing, crying, and completely unaware if Kaylee and Maddie were also inside, though location-sharing apps showed both girls' phones were in the house. The first responder to arrive was Officer Mitch Nunes, whose body camera footage provides a chilling, unvarnished account of the crime scene's discovery and the tactical shift required to secure it. Nunes, a 22-year-old patrol officer, arrived at the scene with the operational expectation of managing a routine medical assist for an intoxicated or unresponsive college student. Previously, his interactions at the King Road address had been limited to minor infractions, such as noise complaints related to underage drinking parties. Upon arriving, Nunes encountered the highly distressed group of friends and roommates gathered outside. The atmosphere was fraught with confusion. Hunter Johnson intercepted Nunes and guided him into the residence, leading him toward the second floor and pointing him directly to Xana Kernodle's bedroom. The body camera footage captures the instantaneous paradigm shift experienced by the officer. Upon breaching the threshold of Kernodle's bedroom and observing the bodies of Kernodle and Chapin, Nunes immediately recognized the presence of catastrophic, lethal trauma that far exceeded an unconscious person call. His law enforcement training immediately superseded his initial shock. Nunes instantly commanded the civilians to get back, physically pushing the perimeter of the crime scene outward to prevent the contamination of forensic evidence. Over his radio, Nunes communicated the severity of the situation to dispatch, utilizing stark, colloquial law enforcement terminology to cut through the confusion, reporting that he had found 2 looks like Deddy's. Once the external perimeter was secured and a secondary officer arrived on the scene, the tactical objective shifted from providing medical aid to clearing the house. In any unverified, fresh homicide scene, responding units must operate under the presumption that the suspect may still be armed and fortified within the building. Nunez and the second officer drew their weapons and systematically cleared the first and second floors, checking closets and concealed spaces before advancing up the narrow, creaky stairwell to the third floor. Upon reaching the top level, the officers entered Madison Mogen's bedroom. It was here that Nunez discovered the bodies of Mogen and Goncalves, who had been brutally attacked while sharing a single bed. The profound visual and psychological toll of uncovering a quadruple homicide within minutes of arriving at a medical call is captured acutely on the unredacted audio of the body camera. Upon viewing the sheer carnage of the third-floor scene, Officer Nunez is heard letting out a heavy, visceral sigh of shock and realization. Shortly after, a volunteer ambulance arrived with sirens wailing. However, the medical team stayed for only a couple of minutes before the police instructed them to leave the scene. There was no one to load inside the ambulance, as it was much too late for anyone to need medical attention. For the group of friends sitting on the curb, the departure of the empty ambulance cemented the catastrophic reality of the situation. Among those gathered was Kaylee's ex-boyfriend, Jack Ducour, who appeared dazed and confused. The police officers arriving on the scene averted their gazes and offered no immediate answers to the sobbing students, though they did briefly place Jack in the back of a police cruiser to ask him questions after learning of his relationship with Kaylee. When Ethan's brother, Hunter Chapin, was woken up by a fraternity brother and brought to the scene, Hunter Johnson pulled him aside to a nearby dumpster to deliver the crushing news. I don't know. We think Xana, Ethan, Kaylee, and Maddie were all murdered last night. The friends remained huddled outside for hours, screaming, crying, and wrapped in blankets brought by a neighbor, waiting in a numb daze as their world was completely shattered. Stacy Chapin was in the produce aisle of the Hagen grocery store in Mount Vernon, chatting with a friend, when she missed multiple calls from her daughter, Maisie. This was unusual, as Maisie typically texted. In addition, Ethan, who was usually the quickest to reply, had not responded to a text she sent earlier asking for photos from a formal event. When Stacy finally answered a call from Maisie's phone, it was her son Hunter on the line, with the sound of wailing in the background. Hunter told her, "Ethan's not here anymore," and when Stacy confusingly told him to go get his brother, Hunter clarified, "Mom, you don't understand. They're not on this earth anymore." Stacy abandoned her grocery cart and immediately called her husband Jim, who was just dropping into the Skagit Valley on his drive back from his workshop near Coeur d'Alene. They met at their condo in La Conner and piled into Jim's black Chevy Tahoe for a grueling 6-hour drive to Moscow, battling Sunday afternoon traffic. The drive was agonizingly silent regarding updates, as Hunter and Maisie had been asked to hand their phones over to the police. Frustrated by the lack of communication, Stacy called the university's emergency number and angrily chewed out the person who answered, who happened to be Dean of Students Blaine Eccles, yelling, "That's not good enough," when he told her the police were handling the situation. Jim and Stacy arrived in Moscow at 9:30 p.m. and immediately hugged their surviving children. After a quick debrief with Chief James Fry and Captain Tyson Barrett at the police station, they went to the Best Western Hotel. Despite her own profound grief, Stacy's maternal instincts took over. She found the surviving roommates and friends huddled in the lobby, hugged them, offered them food and blankets, and promised to arrange counseling for them. Around lunchtime, Steve Goncalves was in the living room of his Rathdrum, Idaho home, watching a Seahawks game with his family. They were discussing whether it was safe for his eldest daughter, Olivia, who was 22 weeks pregnant and living in Los Angeles, to visit for Thanksgiving, because Steve had recently developed Ramsay Hunt syndrome. The calm was shattered when Steve's wife, Christy, said she thought something had happened to Kaylee. Kaylee's younger sisters, Autumn and Aubrey, had started receiving alarming messages from friends about a heavy police presence at the King Road house, an unconscious person, and eventually a homicide alert. The family frantically called Kaylee, Maddie, and Kaylee's ex-boyfriend Jack Ducour, but all the calls went unanswered. Olivia called Maddie's mother, Karen Laramie, who was already rushing to Moscow but was intercepted by police and sent to the station. For hours, the Goncalves family waited in an agonizing information vacuum, tracking photos of the police tape online. It wasn't until between 4 p.m. and 5 p.m. that police finally arrived at their doorstep to deliver the news that Kaylee, Maddie, and 2 others were dead. The officers had no answers as to how or why it happened. Devastated, Steve went upstairs to his bedroom, shut the door, and wept tears of profound grief and shame, feeling he had failed in his role as the family's protector. After a sleepless night at the Best Western Hotel, Stacy and Jim Chapin decided to take a walk around 4 or 5 a.m. in the pitch-black, freezing cold. Bundled up, they walked in silence past the university's water tower, the Kibbe Dome, the golf course Ethan loved, and the Arboretum. Seeking a moment of connection, they went to the Sigma Chi fraternity house, expecting to walk right in as they usually did, but found the doors locked. Continuing their walk, they eventually found themselves standing outside 1122 King Road. The massive police presence from the day before was gone. The scene was eerily silent, marked only by yellow police tape and a single police officer. As the first light of dawn streaked the sky, Stacy held Jim's hand and realized this was her final goodbye to her son. As they walked back past the Sigma Chi house on Nez Perce Drive, they encountered a shocking sight in the parking lot. The fraternity brothers were packing their cars and fleeing en masse, flocking like birds caught in the winter snow, rushing to head south. When the young men spotted Ethan's parents, they dropped their belongings to tightly hug Jim and Stacy. The brothers' mothers had commanded them to come home immediately, and as Stacy observed, they were broken, all of them. The flight of the Sigma Chi brothers was part of a much larger, panicked mass exodus out of Moscow, complicated by a descending snowstorm. In an emergency meeting, UI Provost Tori Lawrence, Dean of Students Blaine Eccles, and Faculty Senate Head Kelly Quinnett decided that classes would be offered remotely and made entirely optional through the upcoming Thanksgiving break. Eccles had even explicitly told the Sigma Chi brothers the night before to just get the hell out of town and not worry about assignments. While the university's decision was intended to protect students' mental health, it inadvertently created a massive hurdle for law enforcement. Investigators were privately frustrated that the university had effectively sent thousands of potential witnesses scattering across the country to places like Florida and Texas before detectives could interview them. For the residents and students who could not leave Moscow, such as international students or those who had nowhere else to go, the town transformed into a terrifying trap. The Moscow Police Department's decision to remain tightly lipped and their confusing statements regarding whether the public was safe created a massive information vacuum that fueled rampant paranoia. Neighbors suddenly began mistrusting neighbors, wondering if the killer was someone living right next door. In response, the community desperately fortified their homes. Alex Salvador, a recruited tennis player from Spain, was trapped in a nearby apartment with 3 international teammates. Terrified to go outside after 4 p.m., they all purchased handguns and spent sleepless nights peering out the windows at the blue lights of circling police cruisers. Claire Qualls, a 20-year-old student EMT, was so terrified of being attacked on the dark stairs to her basement apartment that she bought a handgun, asked her roommate to teach her how to use it, and purchased a pull-apart personal safety alarm to keep by her bed. Student journalist Ben DeWitt, who already carried a concealed weapon, began pushing his couch against his apartment door every night. Local pastor Doug Wilson learned from a local locksmith that his business was completely overwhelmed by residents who had historically never locked their doors, suddenly demanding deadbolts. Claire Qualls had her father drive over to replace a cheap window that could be easily opened from the outside. Even seasoned locals changed their habits. Evan Ellis, a veteran local crime reporter, locked his radio studio door for the first time in 20 years, suddenly realizing the animal could still be in town. Mike Pattinson, a local lawyer, immediately stopped teasing his Colombian wife for bolting their doors, realizing Moscow was no longer the perfectly safe sanctuary they thought it was. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. On Sunday, November 13th, 2022, as the first wave of law enforcement responded to the horrific scene at 1122 King Road, Detective Corporal Brett Payne and other investigators made their way to the top floor of the house. In the bedroom on the right, lying on the bed next to the body of Maddy Mogen, they noticed a tan leather Ka-Bar knife sheath. At the time, no murder weapon or fingerprints were visible in the room, making this solitary item stand out. Shortly after the initial police sweep, Latah County prosecutor Bill Thompson arrived at the scene. A 30-year veteran who had famously never lost a case, Thompson ducked under the police tape to conduct his own walkthrough of the interior. After viewing the bodies of Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin on the main level, he made his way to the upper level where Maddy Mogen and Kaylee Goncalves were found. When Thompson saw the sheath beside Maddy, he immediately recognized the magnitude of the discovery. Because no other obvious weapon or prints were left behind, Thompson knew that the sheath was a critical piece of evidence and potentially the killer's only fatal mistake. He immediately theorized that if the investigators could extract trace DNA from it, they could utilize investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, and public genealogical websites like Ancestry or 23andMe to construct a family tree and track down the perpetrator. Meanwhile, Moscow Police Chief James Fry was about an hour into a 4-hour drive back to Moscow from a weekend visit in Wenatchee, Washington. His wife, Julie, the newly elected Latah County clerk, was in the passenger seat as Fry fielded rapid-fire calls. Captain Tyson Barrett, the campus police commander who was running point at the scene, called Fry to inform him of the mass homicide. During their communications, Barrett relayed the crucial update that a knife sheath had been found in one of the bedrooms. Hearing this, Fry pressed harder on the gas pedal to speed back to Moscow. He instantly recognized the gravity of the find and concluded that it was absolutely imperative the discovery of the sheath not leak to the press or the public. Fry reasoned that a maniacal murderer was currently on the loose and was almost certainly watching their every move and monitoring the news. Thompson, who was known for never speaking publicly about investigations until sentencing, was in complete alignment with Fry on this strategy. The two leaders decided to keep the discovery of the sheath a heavily guarded secret to protect the integrity of the investigation, resulting in a void of information that would soon frustrate the media and the victims' families. Recognizing the unprecedented magnitude of the quadruple homicide, Chief Fry immediately realized the case was too complex for his 37-man department to handle alone. Because Moscow lacked its own forensics lab, Fry initially called in the Idaho State Police, ISP, whose forensics team had to drive 5 hours from Meridian to meticulously process the scene. Fry also knew he urgently needed the nationwide reach and massive manpower of the FBI, particularly after the scattering of potential witnesses throughout the country ordered by the university. When an FBI agent, who was already present at the Moscow police station's briefing room, asked Fry if he needed them to come in, Fry responded, "Yes, and fast." The federal government's machinery immediately clicked into gear, deploying agents from Salt Lake City and across the country to fly into Moscow. This massive influx of resources resulted in a unified task force of approximately 45 law enforcement officers from local, state, and federal agencies. Remarkably, for an investigation of this scale, there was an extraordinary absence of jurisdictional infighting or ego clashes. The task of organizing this massive operation fell to Brett Payne, a 32-year-old military veteran whom Fry had recently promoted to detective corporal. Payne was whip-smart, detail-oriented, and possessed the gift of the gab needed to extract information. Standing at a whiteboard in the briefing room, Payne structured the investigation by establishing a strict daily routine. The task force would meet every morning at 8 a.m. for assignments and regroup at 5 or 6 p.m. to deliver status reports where no detail was to be held back. Payne then divided the 45-man task force into 6 highly specialized teams. Victimology was the team responsible for building a comprehensive profile of Xana, Ethan, Maddie, and Kaylee. They reached out to family, friends, romantic partners, and teachers, operating on the investigative adage that in order to know how a person died, you first need to know how they lived. The interviewers team comprised seasoned detectives like Danny Vargas, John Lawrence, Lawrence Mowery, and Payne himself. This group was tasked with tracking down and questioning anyone who had been near the crime scene or might be a witness. Forensics team consisted of experts capable of sifting through massive amounts of cell phone data, building DNA profiles, and analyzing fingerprints and blood evidence. Videos and local CCTV had analysts solely dedicated to scouring surveillance footage from businesses and residences around Moscow for any sign of the killer's movements. Tip management was a dedicated group set up to handle, answer, and meticulously document the thousands of calls coming into the public tip line, and note-taking as a specific team assigned to keep a rigorous record of all daily assignments, progress reports, and to-do lists to keep the massive investigation organized. Art Betke, a former USDA biochemist who had been the mayor of Moscow for less than a year, felt completely unprepared for the media circus that descended on the town. While the police department and Latah County prosecutor Bill Thompson maintained strict silence to protect the investigation, Betke grew increasingly frustrated by the massive information vacuum. Wild rumors, such as the murders being the work of a Colombian drug cartel, were running rampant, and Betke felt the town was looking ridiculous and employing cartoon security. Betke repeatedly demanded that someone in uniform get in front of a microphone to reassure the public. Both Thompson and Chief Fry strongly advised him to stay quiet, with Thompson explicitly warning him, "Don't say anything, Art. You'll misspeak and mess everything up. You aren't trained for this." The city supervisors echoed this and ordered him not to speak. However, feeling the pressure of his office and believing the New York Times would be a safe outlet, Betke agreed to an interview. Though he attempted to provide careful context, the published article stripped away his nuance and highlighted a single, shocking quote. The overall assessment is that it's a crime of passion. Betke immediately realized his mistake and knew the quote would only fan the flames of the rumor bonfire, achieving the exact opposite of his goal to soothe the public. He later expressed great dislike for the national media, noting they lift bits out of the middle of paragraphs. In response to the blunder, Chief Fry called a city supervisor and asked him to officially tell the mayor to stop talking. On Monday, November 14th, the day after the murders were discovered, Jack Ducour arrived at the Goncalves family's ranch house in Rathdrum, Idaho, at around 9 p.m. When Jack knocked on the door, he was already crying. Steve Goncalves, Kaylee's father, opened the door and was immediately business first, telling the young man, "Jack, I gotta ask you to roll up your sleeves. I hate to do this, but I've got to do it." Jack voluntarily showed Steve his arms, wrists, and hands. Steve found absolutely nothing, no scratches or marks that would indicate Jack had been wielding a large knife or involved in a violent struggle just 24 hours prior. After the inspection, the two hugged, and Jack walked the family through everything he knew about that night. He showed them his phone, which contained the numerous missed calls from Kaylee and Maddie in the early hours of Sunday morning. Jack broke down, expressing immense guilt that he had been asleep. He agonized that if only he had woken up and answered his phone, Kaylee and Maddie might still be alive. Steve comforted him, assuring Jack that there was nothing anyone could have done, that the girls had done everything right by getting a sober ride home, and that no one could have successfully fought off an attacker wielding a knife in their bedroom. When Olivia Goncalves learned of her sister's murder, she immediately packed her 2 young children and her husband Robbie into the car to begin a 20-hour overnight drive from Los Angeles to Idaho. Refusing to sit idly by, she used the long drive to act as a detective. Knowing that Kaylee was on their mother's cell phone plan, Olivia logged into the account to pull up Kaylee's phone logs and see who her sister had communicated with in her final hours. Through her digging, Olivia tracked down the designated rideshare driver who had picked the girls up, reaching him directly via text message. It was this driver who informed Olivia that the grub truck had a camera on its roof that live-streamed to Twitch. Olivia pulled up the video where she watched Kaylee haltingly order carbonara mac and cheese and observed a man in a gray hoodie standing behind them and eventually following them toward their car. She didn't stop there. Olivia also tracked down a neighbor's Ring camera footage that confirmed Kaylee and Maddie arrived home safely at 1:57 a.m. and noted that Kaylee's final phone calls were to her ex-boyfriend, Jack DeCour. Around noon on Tuesday, November 15th, Olivia put all her findings into a secure electronic file and sent it to Moscow police detective Lawrence Mowry. She expected the police to release the information, especially the Twitch video, to help generate tips. Instead, hours passed with no update, and the police even continued to publicly state the incorrect time for the girls' return home. The breaking point for Olivia came with the Moscow's mayor's disastrous interview, which she felt that the crime of passion statement painted a completely misleading picture of her sister and her friends. Furious at the police's silence, Olivia decided to take control of the narrative. Sitting on her parents' black leather sofa with her husband, her face white with exhaustion, she gave an interview to Haley Gwentner of a Spokane NBC affiliate. She made a direct, desperate plea to the public to turn in anyone exhibiting suspicious behavior, urging, if you notice something in the shared bathroom trash can, if you noticed a weird smudge on the fridge after your roommate came home late, call it in. She also gave an interview to Inside Edition, publicly airing the family's frustration by stating, "We're not getting any answers, and we're not going to settle for that." Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Following the murders, Jim and Stacy Chapin retreated to their summer house in the tight-knit community of Priest Lake, Idaho. Though they were besieged by interview requests from almost every major national news organization, they made a family decision not to speak to the media. However, on Tuesday morning, Stacy saw that the internet was erupting with vicious rumors. In the wake of a police press release mentioning an edged weapon, TikTok users and internet sleuths began wildly speculating that Ethan was involved in a drug deal gone wrong or a sinister love triangle. Stacy felt a blazing anger, absolutely refusing to let anyone defame her son's character. To regain control of Ethan's story, Stacy enlisted the help of her neighbor Kim, a former broadcasting professional. They decided to grant a single 10-minute interview to a trusted local journalist, Connor Board of King 5 Seattle. Kim acted as the director, setting Stacy and Jim up in chairs in front of their living room bookshelves and angling a laptop to frame them. During the interview, the Chapins appeared shell-shocked and tearful, but Stacy spoke with deliberate clarity to definitively crush the rumors, causing their family and the other victims' families so much pain. "The reason we've agreed to do this is there's some misinformation out there," Stacy told the reporter. "The things that are being said are 100% not true. There's not drugs involved. There's not some weird love triangle. All of the kids were just really good, great kids." Emily Alant and Hunter Johnson, Xana Kernodle and Ethan Chapin's best friends, were deeply traumatized and sought refuge with Emily's parents at their condo in Puerto Aventuras, Mexico. However, their attempt to grieve in peace quickly turned into a terrifying ordeal fueled by online conspiracy theorists. The night the young couple arrived in Mexico happened to be Hunter's birthday. Attempting to lift his spirits and show appreciation, Emily posted a selfie on Snapchat of the two of them looking exhausted but hugging, with tall green margaritas visible on the table. Without context, internet sleuths twisted the vacation photo into a sinister narrative, interpreting it as proof that the couple had fled the country after committing the quadruple homicide over a drug deal gone bad. The dark corners of the internet, including 4chan and YouTube, quickly mobilized against them. Sleuths began digging up old videos and manufacturing evidence to fit their theories. A video surfaced showing Hunter answering the door of 1122 King Road to police while wearing zip ties on his wrists, leading sleuths to wildly speculate that he was involved in bondage. In reality, the video was taken during a harmless fraternity drinking game called Champagne Shackles, and Hunter had answered the door because he was one of the only people of legal drinking age present. A YouTuber named Jonathan Lee Riches falsely claimed that Xana's father had recently installed a lock on the front door of the King Road house, specifically to keep Emily out, because she threw wild parties, attempting to paint her as a bitter suspect. In truth, Xana's father never installed any such lock. Emily, who had previously never understood why anyone would make their social media accounts private, immediately locked hers down. Rather than finding peace in Mexico, the couple was consumed by fear. Emily was terrified that the actual killer had targeted her friends and might have followed her and Hunter to Mexico. She clung to Hunter at night, refused to walk anywhere alone after sundown, and insisted on keeping the bedroom lights on. Hunter, meanwhile, was so deeply in shock that he remained entirely mute for long stretches of the trip. Watching the young couple walk around like zombies, Emily's mother, Karen, and Hunter's mother, Jessica, felt completely helpless. While the prosecutor's office advised them not to engage with the trolls, the harassment reached such an unbearable pitch that Jessica eventually called Moscow Police Chief James Fry directly, begging him to publicly clear their children. The next day, Chief Fry held a press conference explicitly stating that the surviving roommates and the friends who had gathered at the house that morning were not suspects. This provided a brief 24-hour reprieve from the cyberbullying. Unfortunately, the harassment exploded again shortly after, partially because of Steve and Kaylee Goncalves' TV interview in which they stated that they felt the police were clearing people too quickly, inadvertently throwing fuel back onto the rumor bonfire. On November 16, 2022, 3 days after the murders were discovered, Moscow Police Chief James Fry stepped up to the podium in the police conference room to deliver his first-ever live press conference. Facing a room packed with national media, the chief was deeply out of his element. Fry had meticulously rehearsed the boundaries of what he could say with Loudoun County Prosecutor Bill Thompson, prioritizing the absolute necessity of keeping the discovery of the knife sheath a secret from the media and the killer. Attempting to project authority, Fry flanked himself with a massive PR team of local leadership, including UI President Scott Green, Dean Blaine Eccles, Idaho State Police Colonel Kedrick Wills, and Prosecutor Thompson. Thompson's presence alone shocked veteran local reporters, as he famously never attended press conferences. From the moment Fry began speaking, he stumbled. He mangled the pronunciation of the victims' last names, Chapin and Goncalves, and offered the press corps virtually no new information, simply confirming the victims were stabbed, the weapon was missing, and there were no signs of forced entry. The press conference devolved into chaos when Fry dropped a contradictory bombshell regarding public safety. He stated, "We believe this was an isolated, targeted attack on our victims. We do not have a suspect at this time, and that individual is still out there. We cannot say that there's no threat to the community, and as we have stated, please stay vigilant." During the Q&A session, pandemonium erupted. Reporters aggressively confronted Fry, pointing out that the police department had spent the last 3 days repeatedly assuring the terrified town that there was no broader threat to the public. When asked why he was changing his mind, a flustered Fry attempted to reword his answer 4 different times, with each attempt sounding worse and more confusing than the last. The painful briefing continued as Fry was forced to dodge other landmines. He was asked to explain Mayor Art Betke's disastrous earlier comment to the New York Times, to which Fry awkwardly responded that they were looking into every aspect, and he wouldn't speculate. The press also cornered him about the two surviving roommates, Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk. Reporters demanded to know why there was an 8-hour delay before 911 was called, whether the girls were suspects, and ultimately referred to them as witnesses. Knowing that confirming them as witnesses could jeopardize their safety and the investigation, Fry had to walk a perilous linguistic tightrope, pushing back with, "I don't think I ever said that they were witnesses. I said they were there." Fry was agonizingly aware that his performance was a disaster, broadcast live to the nation, and even to his own mother. Neighboring Pullman Mayor Glenn Johnson, who held a PhD in communications, watched the broadcast and noted simply, "James is a nice guy. He got overwhelmed, I think." The catastrophic showing firmly cemented the national media's narrative that the Moscow Police Department was a group of bumbling, small-town Keystone cops. Christine Cameron, an assistant principal from upstate New York, and her childhood friend Alina Smith from Texas, created the University of Idaho Case Discussion Facebook group on November 19, 2022. The duo had previously managed 10 other true crime pages, covering cases like Gabby Petito and Madeleine McCann, with the ultimate goal of building an audience for a planned true crime podcast called Two Sleuths, One Crime. The Idaho Case page exploded at an unprecedented rate, gaining 3,000 members overnight and swelling to 200,000 members within a few weeks, making it the fastest-growing true crime page in Facebook history. Christine explicitly attributed this massive growth to the information vacuum created by the Moscow Police Department. Because law enforcement kept their findings strictly confidential and did not ask the public for help, desperate internet sleuths flocked to the Facebook page to dissect the few available clues. Behind the scenes, local Moscow students who were terrified and unwilling to speak directly to police created fake Facebook accounts to message Christine and Alina. The two women essentially acted as therapists and go-betweens, collecting information, such as a tip from girls who had been with Maddie and Kaylee at the corner club, and passing it on to the FBI. Kaylee's sister, Kaylee Goncalves, also joined the group to monitor the discourse, search for clues, and directly debunk false rumors. Publicly, the page descended into chaos. Members wildly speculated about the surviving roommates, Dylan and Bethany, the victims' ex-boyfriends, and Hoodie Guy from the Grub Truck video. Some users victim-blamed the students, suggesting the murders were the result of a drug deal gone bad, or falsely claiming Kaylee and Maddie had secret OnlyFans accounts. The toxicity frequently spilled into real life. Members threatened each other in private messages. A user called Christine's school employer to complain about her online activities, and another user falsely accused a member of soliciting a minor, prompting a call to that member's HR department. Following the disastrous first press conference, the Idaho State Police intervened by bringing in Aaron Snell, a public information officer from outside Boise, to act as Chief James Fry's media coach. Snell rigorously prepared Fry before every public appearance, drilling him for an hour, practicing voice fluctuations, and acting as the national press to test his answers. This preparation paid off during the November 20th press conference, which went significantly better. During this briefing, Fry focused on detailing the autopsy results and clarifying the victim's last movements. Snell also advised Fry on his public image, instructing him not to shave the beard he had grown for No Shave November, because the nation knows you with a beard. On November 21st, more than 1,000 people, including friends, family, and the entire Sigma Chi fraternity, crowded into the McIntyre Hall Auditorium at Skagit Valley College in Mount Vernon, Washington, to honor Ethan Chapin. The Chapin family had been shielded from the media frenzy by a Boston PR executive and insulated by close friends who organized meal trains and accommodations. At the viewing before the service, Stacy tucked a Taco Bell gift card and a dry sock into Ethan's casket, while Jim added a golf tee. During the service, Jim delivered a eulogy urging the college students to return to school safely and carry on Ethan's legacy. Stacy then took the stage to deliver a powerful, definitive eulogy aimed at crushing the toxic online rumors surrounding her son's death. She explicitly stated that the autopsy cleared Ethan of any drug involvement and dismissed rumors of a weird love triangle. Providing comfort to the mourners, Stacy emphasized that Ethan was right where he wanted to be, asleep in bed, and that he did not suffer. It went very quickly. The Chapins were the only family to hold a public service at this time. The other victims' families refrained from doing so out of fear that the killer might attend. On Thanksgiving Day, the FBI's massive mobile command center trailer arrived at the Moscow police station, drawing the attention of TV cameras as it barely fit through the gates. Behind the scenes, a critical pivot in the investigation was occurring regarding the trace DNA found on the button snap of the tan leather K-bar knife sheath left beside Maddy Mogen. Because the initial run of the DNA through CODIS, the FBI's database of fingerprinted individuals, had come up completely empty, investigators sent the sample to Othram, a genomics lab in Texas. Othram was tasked with using investigative genetic genealogy, IgG, to build a family tree by checking the sample against public genealogy databases like Family Tree DNA. Meanwhile, a massive video canvassing effort was being conducted by the specialized Videos and Local CCTV team, one of the 6 dedicated groups formed on the morning of Monday, November 14th, by lead investigator Brett Payne, when he divided the unified task force, comprising the Moscow Police Department, Idaho State Police, and the FBI, into specialized units. The sole mandate of this specific team was to scour thousands of hours of surveillance footage from homes and businesses around Moscow for any sign of the killer's movements. In the days following the murders, the video team's painstaking work paid off when they homed in on a white vehicle exhibiting highly suspicious behavior near the 1122 King Road crime scene in the early hours of Sunday, November 13th. Footage showed the car making 3 passes around the King Road house between 3:29 a.m. and 4 a.m. At 4:04 a.m., the vehicle appeared to execute a 3-point turn near the residence, drove back and forth on King Road, and then turned onto Queen Road, which offered a route behind the house. Finally, the car reappeared on camera at 4:20 a.m., leaving the area at high speed. Another camera at a local gas station also captured a white car leaving the area in the relevant time frame, though the driver's face was obscured and the car lacked a front license plate. Initially, investigators believed the car might be a Nissan Sentra. However, on November 24th, Thanksgiving Day, an FBI vehicle specialist was able to examine a better image of the car. The specialist definitively identified the vehicle as a white Hyundai Elantra, specifically estimating it to be a 2011, 2012, or 2013 model. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. Acting on this crucial piece of intelligence, Moscow Police Chief James Fry approved a Be on the Lookout OLO alert the following day, November 25th. This alert was distributed to local law enforcement agencies across the region, instructing them to keep an eye out for the vehicle. 4 days after the BOLO went out, in the early hours of November 29th, Washington State University, WSU, police officer Daniel Tiengo began searching the university's database for white Elantras registered on the Pullman campus. He discovered one registered to a student named Brian Koberger. Shortly after, Tiengo's colleague, Officer Curtis Whitman, physically located the vehicle parked in a WSU student housing parking lot and officially logged it. However, this was not immediately escalated up the chain of command to the Moscow Police Department. The delay occurred because Koberger's Elantra was a 2015 model, falling outside the 2011 to 2013 window specified in Chief Fry's initial BOLO, and also because white Hyundai Elantras are highly ubiquitous vehicles. On November 29, the administrators of the University of Idaho Case Discussion Facebook group, Christine Cameron and Alina Smith, began noticing unusual and highly aggressive posts from a user calling himself Papa Roger. His avatar was a creepy, digitally created profile of a gray-haired man in a military uniform. Papa Roger repeatedly unnerved the group's members by posting macabre, highly accurate details about the crime long before they were public knowledge. He was the very first person on the page to introduce the idea of a knife sheath, posting, "Of the evidence released, the murder weapon has been consistent as a large fixed-blade knife. This leads me to believe they found the sheath." He aggressively debated users who doubted this theory, interrogating one user named Dustin Stubblefield with questions like, "How did the killer hold the knife prior to entering the scene? And do you carry a knife?" until the user told him to give it a rest because he sounded like a psycho. By December 14th, he had grown bold enough to openly challenge the police's progress, posting, "Fight me. Ellie is no closer to solving this than they were 30 days ago." A taunt that took on an eerie significance given what he appeared to know. On the same forum, he accurately estimated that the killer had spent 15 minutes inside the King Road house and stated with precision that the killer is not in the victim's immediate circle. When another user asked whether the assailant had fled the area, he replied simply, "Likely." While internet sleuths and the page administrators were monitoring Papa Roger, with Christine Cameron even Googling his name and discovering a link to the incel mass murderer Elliot Rodger, official law enforcement was also quietly tracking him. The Unified Investigative Task Force had appointed a specific investigator dedicated solely to tracking all social media discussions about the case. Operating out of the police station, Moscow Police Chief James Fry and his social media investigator were closely following Papa Roger's posts. The investigator noted that Papa Roger's assertions were perfectly accurate and actively evaluated a critical question. Was Papa Roger right because he knew the suspect, or because he was the suspect? Since the discovery of the tan leather K-bar knife sheath next to Maddie Mogen's body, investigators had been trying to track down the perpetrator using the trace DNA found on its button snap. The process was meandering. Initially, the genomics lab Othram ran the sample through public databases like Family Tree DNA, yielding only low matches to 4 brothers, which stalled when one brother refused to voluntarily provide a DNA sample. The Idaho State Police then handed the findings over to the FBI, who utilized a loophole in Justice Department policy to run the profile through GEDmatch and MyHeritage, databases that typically do not permit law enforcement searches. This led to a massive breakthrough. On the evening of December 19th, the FBI called lead investigator Brett Payne and tipped him off to the name Brian Kohberger. Payne later noted that this was a name the Moscow Police Department had not previously associated with the investigation. The following morning, the FBI held a Microsoft Teams meeting with Payne to walk him through how they had constructed the family tree. Although Payne admitted the complex science of IgG was above his head, the crucial takeaway was that the family tree led directly to the Kohberger family in Pennsylvania. This tip gave Payne exactly what he needed to begin pulling Kohberger's vehicle and cell phone records, finally connecting the suspect's 2015 white Hyundai Elantra, identified by the Washington State University earlier during the Bolo alert. Coincidentally, WSU's Criminal Justice Department Chair, Dr. Melanie Angela Newley, had just issued a formal letter officially terminating Kohberger from his PhD program and cutting off his funding on grounds unrelated to the murder case investigation. This termination was the culmination of weeks of disciplinary issues regarding Kohberger's role as a teaching assistant. Earlier in the semester, female students had complained about his harsh grading, and classmates noted his misogynistic behavior during classes. Following a verbal altercation with Professor John Snyder, Kohberger was placed on a performance improvement plan on November 3rd. Though the department noted minor progress during a December 7th meeting, Kohberger completely lost his temper in a second altercation with Professor Snyder in his office on December 9th. The outburst was so severe that on December 11th, Dr. Newley requested a meeting with Koberger to effectively fire him. In her December 19 termination letter, Dr. Newley wrote that following his altercation with Snyder, it became apparent that you had not made progress regarding professionalism. Because Koberger had already left Washington to drive cross-country with his father, he received this official termination letter while sitting at home in Pennsylvania, completely unaware that on that very same day, a cross-country law enforcement task force had just learned his name. Brian Christopher Koberger was born on November 21, 1994. He grew up in the Pocono Mountains in Pennsylvania, specifically in the Indian Mountain Lake area, in a family-centered home grounded in his mother Mary Ann's Catholic upbringing, which emphasized loyalty and self-reliance. His father, Michael, worked as an HVAC maintenance man for the Pleasant Valley School District. Brian had two sisters, Melissa and Amanda. During his childhood, his family shared fond memories of ordering takeout and waking the children up to lay blankets on the deck and stargaze. As a teenager, Koberger struggled significantly. He was overweight, endured persistent bullying, and had a standoffish personality that his family later believed was related to an autism spectrum disorder. He also suffered from visual snow syndrome, a neurological condition resembling TV static and tinnitus. During these years, he posted online about feeling like an organic sack of meat with no self-worth, noting that he experienced no emotion and little remorse. Koberger eventually spiraled into a severe heroin addiction. To fund his drug habit, he stole his sister Melissa's phone and sold it at a mall for $200, an act that prompted his parents to call the police on him in 2014. Neighbors also suspected him of theft. Mark Bayless, a former Navy SEAL whose son was friends with Brian, believed Koberger stole $30,000 worth of rare coins, prescription pills, and military knives from his home. In 2016, Koberger used the opportunity of his friend Jeremy Saba being in jail to break into the Saba family home and steal an iPad. Following stints in rehab, Koberger's father took him to a local boxing gym run by former pro boxer Jesse Harris in the fall of 2012. Michael Koberger explained that his son wanted to lose weight and was starting a vegan diet. Brian became hyper-focused, spending 2 to 3 hours at the gym daily, losing over 100 pounds and learning to box. In 2018, he unexpectedly showed up at the Saba home to apologize and make amends for stealing from them. Koberger graduated from Pleasant Valley High School in 2013 and briefly attended Monroe Career and Technical Institute. In 2015, he worked as a security officer for his local school district. He then earned an associate degree in psychology from Northampton Community College in 2018. Koberger continued his studies at DeSales University, earning a bachelor's degree in psychology in 2020 and a master's degree in criminal justice in 2022. At DeSales, classmates called him the Ghost because of his spooky, aloof demeanor, bulging eyes, and habit of vanishing immediately after class. He took a psychological sleuthing class with renowned criminologist Dr. Catherine Ramsland, studying notorious killers like Dennis Rader, the BTK killer, and Elliot Rodger. Koberger learned about criminal profiling, digital forensics, and how killers often make mistakes at crime scenes due to tunnel vision and adrenaline. He proved to be a highly advanced student, leading his professor to recommend him for a PhD program at Washington State University. Koberger struggled socially, particularly with women. He was a virgin who exhibited traits associated with the incel movement, harboring misogynistic views and resentment toward women. In 2019, he frequented Seven Sirens Brewing Company in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, where he aggressively forced himself into conversations with female patrons and staff, asking for their addresses. The owner eventually confronted him and told him to leave women alone. In the spring of 2022, in preparation for his move, he purchased a military-style K-bar knife and sheath on Amazon. He also posted a survey on Reddit, asking criminals to provide information on how emotions and psychological traits influence their decision-making during crimes. In April 2022, he interviewed over Zoom with Pullman Police Chief Gary Jenkins for an internship, but was not selected because Jenkins found him antisocial and unlikely to build trust. In the summer of 2022, Kohberger moved to Pullman, Washington, to begin his PhD in criminology at WSU, located just 8 miles from the University of Idaho in Moscow. During his first semester, his behavior alarmed his cohort and faculty. He regularly interrupted female peers, peppering them with aggressive questions to make them look foolish. He told a male classmate that he believed in traditional gender roles and that women should be homemakers rather than pursuing master's degrees. Following complaints, he had an angry altercation with Professor Snyder on September 23rd, reportedly muttering that women didn't belong in the classroom. He also installed a home surveillance system for a female neighbor at his Steptoe Village apartment complex who had experienced break-ins. He retained the password to access her cameras and later became angry when she declined his invitation for coffee. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. In mid-December 2022, Brian Kohberger embarked on a 4-day cross-country drive from Pullman, Washington, to his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, for the holidays. He made the trip in his white 2015 Hyundai Elantra, accompanied by his father, Michael Kohberger, who sat in the passenger seat. The drive took them across the country, with their vehicle's newly issued Washington state license plates, first pinging on a license plate reader in Loma, Colorado, on December 13th. On the morning of December 15, the third day of their trek, the Kohbergers were pulled over twice within a roughly 5-mile radius on Interstate 70 outside Indianapolis, Indiana. At 10:45 a.m., a sheriff's deputy pulled them over for following a van too closely. Brian remained visibly calm, with his hands relaxed on his lap, while his father did most of the talking. Michael explained that they were slightly punchy from days of driving, wove a couple of confusing stories, and the deputy let them go without a ticket. Less than 10 minutes later, the Elantra was pulled over again on I-70, this time by an Indiana State Police trooper, also for tailgating. The trooper joked about the length of their drive, asking, "You guys scared of airplanes?" before letting them go with a warning to give other vehicles plenty of room. After the 2 encounters in Indiana, the Kohbergers completed the rest of their journey without being stopped again. They arrived in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, on December 16th, where local CCTV footage captured the vehicle's arrival. Following a tip from the FBI on December 19th that identified Brian as a suspect, lead investigator Brett Payne secured a search warrant for his AT&T cell phone records on December 23. Investigators relied on an FBI expert to analyze the data, which provided a chilling, minute-by-minute timeline of Kohberger's movements on the night of the murders. At 2:42 a.m., Kohberger's phone was picked up by the network near his home, moving south out of Pullman. 5 minutes later, it vanished entirely, switched off or put into airplane mode, beginning a 2-hour blackout window during which police allege he entered 1122 King Road and committed the murders. When the phone reappeared at 4:48 a.m., it pinged near Blaine, Idaho on Highway 95 south of Moscow, suggesting he had taken a deliberately circuitous rural route to avoid detection. By 5:30 a.m., the signal had returned to the Pullman network. Then, in a detail that investigators found particularly striking, phone data placed Kohberger leaving Pullman again between 9 and 9:21 a.m., returning to the exact scene of the crime just hours after the murders, pinging off the 1122 King Road network before heading back to Pullman at 9:32 a.m. To determine if Kohberger had stalked the victims, investigators secured another warrant for the previous 6 months of his phone records. This data revealed that his phone had pinged near the King Road house on at least 12 prior occasions between June and November 2022. All but one of these visits occurred late at night. With the cell phone and vehicle data pointing directly to Koberger, the FBI set up a stealth surveillance operation outside his parents' home in Albrightsville, Pennsylvania, where he had traveled for the holidays. Agents noted that Koberger appeared highly skittish and paranoid. In the pitch-black, freezing early hours of the morning, specifically around 4 a.m., Koberger was observed leaving his parents' house wearing nitrile surgical gloves. Rather than using his own family's garbage bins, he carried his trash in Ziploc bags and deposited it into his neighbor's trash cans, making multiple trips back and forth. Because trash placed in a bin or on a curb is considered public property, FBI agents moved in quickly to retrieve the garbage from both the Kobergers and the neighbors' bins. The items were immediately flown across the country to the Idaho State Lab for testing. By December 28th, the lab results were in. While Brian had successfully managed to keep his own DNA out of the trash, investigators found DNA belonging to his father. The lab analysis concluded there was a 99.9998% probability that the DNA recovered from the trash belonged to the biological father of the person who left the trace DNA on the button snap of the K-bar knife sheath at the crime scene. This definitive DNA link provided the final piece of the puzzle, giving Corporal Brett Payne the probable cause needed to finalize his affidavit and secure a judge's signature for Brian Koberger's arrest and search warrants. On the evening of December 29th, Moscow Police Chief James Fry deliberately issued a brief, one-minute press statement announcing that a cleanup crew would be arriving at the 1122 King Road crime scene on Friday. This was a calculated diversion. Fry anticipated that the suspect was likely monitoring the news and wanted to ensure Koberger was completely caught off guard by the impending raid. Later that night, approximately 40 highly trained members of the Pennsylvania State Police Special Emergency Response Team, CERT, and the FBI surrounded the Koberger family home in Albrightsville. To secure a dangerous arrest, they utilized a dynamic entry tactic, deploying explosive flashbangs to create a blinding, deafening diversion. The blast was so forceful that it blew out several windows and doors of the house. Inside, authorities found 28-year-old Brian Koberger awake in the kitchen. He was dressed in a shirt and shorts, wearing medical-style nitrile examination gloves, and was in the process of sorting trash into separate Ziploc bags. Officers surrounded him at gunpoint, zip-tied his hands, and placed him in a police cruiser. Following the arrest, investigators ransacked the house and Koberger's white 2015 Hyundai Elantra. From the car, they seized items including receipts, a shovel, tire irons, hiking boots, gloves, and swabs. From the house, they confiscated electronics, laptops, hard drives, a phone, a Glock 22 handgun with 3 magazines and 3 knives, including a large sheathed tailor cutlery knife. They also took black face masks, gloves, boots, and intriguingly, a book with underlinings on page 118, which internet sleuths later speculated could be a reference to Elliot Rodgers' manifesto. On December 30th, Koberger was booked into the Monroe County Correctional Facility in Stroudsburg, Pennsylvania, about 25 miles from his parents' home. He was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. Upon arrival, he was swabbed for DNA several times and given a dark green, tear-resistant suicide prevention vest to wear. Initially, Koberger waived his right to counsel and spoke with law enforcement for about 15 minutes, calmly stating, "Yes, certainly I'm aware of what's going on. I'm 10 miles away from this." He then abruptly changed his mind and requested an attorney, at which point Chief Public Defender Jason Labar was brought in to handle his extradition back to Idaho. Meanwhile, on the West Coast, Washington State University Police Chief Gary Jenkins had received word of the arrest late the previous night. By 7:15 a.m. PST on December 30th, search warrants were finalized. WSU police assisted Moscow PD investigators in executing searches at Koberger's apartment in the Steptoe Village complex and his on-campus office. From his Washington apartment, police seized items including a single black nitrile glove, a computer tower, vacuum dust, cuttings from a pillow featuring a reddish-brown stain, and multiple possible hair strands, including one possible animal hair strand, which immediately raised questions about whether it belonged to Kaylee Goncalves' dog, Murphy. At 12 p.m., WSU administrators went into lockdown mode regarding media inquiries, but issued a public statement thanking law enforcement and expressing sympathies to the victims' families. At 1 p.m., Chief Fry finally held a press conference at Moscow City Hall, officially announcing to the world that Bryan Kohberger had been arrested for the quadruple homicide. On the evening of December 29, 2022, just hours before the SWAT team raided Bryan Kohberger's parents' home in Pennsylvania, the Facebook user known as Papa Roger escalated his aggressive behavior in the University of Idaho case discussion group. He began hurling derogatory insults at female members, calling one an attention whore and telling another she was full of donkey excrement, ultimately forcing moderator Deb Cully to delete multiple posts and permanently ban him from the group. Within an hour, he had created his own rival Facebook group named Moscow Idaho Murders Anything Goes, featuring a collage of Instagram photographs focused primarily on Madison Mogen. The very next day, December 30th, the day news of Bryan Kohberger's arrest broke nationally, Papa Roger went completely dark. When page administrator Christine Cameron went to review her direct messages with him, she found that not only his messages but his profile picture had vanished entirely. This struck her as deeply unusual. A standard group ban does not erase direct messages. When she then saw Kohberger's face on television, she was struck by what she described as an uncanny resemblance between the suspect and Papa Roger's digital avatar. The total erasure of his digital footprint, timed precisely to the moment Kohberger was taken into custody, left Cameron convinced the two were one and the same, a suspicion that only deepened when others began examining the profile more closely. The username itself raised immediate red flags. Elliot Roger was a 22-year-old who had committed a mass murder-suicide near the UC Santa Barbara campus in 2014, framing his attack as a day of retribution against the women who had rejected him. And Kohberger had formerly studied Roger while pursuing his master's degree at DeSales University. The deliberate invocation of that name, combined with the avatar's physical resemblance to Kohberger, gave the profile a significance that investigators and internet sleuths alike could not ignore. That connection grew more charged when the FBI's receipt of property document from the raid on Kohberger's family home was made public, revealing that agents had seized an unnamed book with underlinings on page 118. Across Facebook, Reddit, and TikTok, cyber sleuths converged on the same theory, that the page in question was page 118 of Roger's 137-page manifesto, My Twisted World. It is the page on which Roger explained how he chose the date for his killing spree, initially planning to strike on Halloween because it was the ultimate party night, but ultimately abandoning the idea due to heavy police presence. Instead, he settled on what he described as a normal party weekend, writing that the day of retribution would have to fall sometime during November. The parallel to the Idaho murders, which occurred on a college game day weekend in mid-November, was not lost on anyone following the case. Sleuths connected this to another item on the FBI's seizure list, a drawing described as a man's mind, depicting a black and white profile of a man's face with a naked, erotically arched woman drawn directly into his frontal lobe, the name Sigmund Freud scribbled underneath. Online communities placed the drawing alongside page 118 of Roger's manifesto, arguing that taken together, the two items painted a portrait of a misogynistic incel who had studied his predecessor carefully and plotted a copycat murder as vengeance against women who would not sleep with him. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. When Bryan Kohberger's plane, touched down at the Pullman-Moscow Regional Airport at 6:23 p.m. on January 4, 2023, it marked the beginning of a long and often turbulent legal journey. Wearing a dark winter jacket over red prison clothes, he was escorted to the Latah County Jail and booked into a maximum security single cell. The following morning, he made his first courthouse appearance before Magistrate Judge Megan Marshall, represented by Kootenai County Public Defender Ann Taylor, where he was formally charged with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary. The potential penalties laid out plainly as life in prison or death. Within the first few weeks, Judge Marshall issued a strict gag order prohibiting police, investigators, and attorneys from speaking to the media, an order she would later expand to include the victims' families' lawyers, prompting an appeal from the Goncalves family attorney Shannon Gray and 30 media organizations. Ann Taylor, meanwhile, began building the defense in earnest, serving subpoenas to several of the victims' friends, including Ava Wood, a neighbor of the victims, whom Taylor also questioned over Zoom about a time she had heard someone jiggling her door handle the previous October. Surviving roommate Bethany Funk was subpoenaed as well, though she was permitted to be interviewed in Nevada. By April, Taylor had filed court papers revealing that Kohberger intended to mount an alibi defense, claiming that in the early morning hours of November 13th, he had been driving south of Pullman and west of Moscow to hike, run, and see the moon and stars. February had also brought news from the university, where President C. Scott Green announced that the owner of 1122 King Road had donated the house to UI and that it would eventually be demolished. The legal proceedings took a significant turn in May. The Goncalves family filed tort claim notices to preserve their right to sue the city, the university, the Idaho State Police, and WSU, with a claim filed under the Mogen family name shortly after, a development that devastated Maddie's paternal grandmother, Kim Deedle Cheeley, who contacted the Idaho Statesman to distance herself from the filing. Behind closed doors that same week, Latah County prosecutor Bill Thompson secretly convened a grand jury, summoning Ethan and Xana's best friends, Emily Allant and Hunter Johnson, who had to slip away from UI graduation festivities to testify. During the May 2023 arraignment, District Judge John C. Judge read Brian Kohberger his charges, 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of felony burglary, and explained the potential penalties of life in prison or the death penalty. Kohberger stared straight ahead and repeatedly answered yes to confirm he understood the charges. However, when Judge asked if he was prepared to enter a plea, Kohberger's chief public defender, Ann Taylor, stood and stated, "Your Honor, we will be standing silent." In response, the judge followed legal protocol and entered a not guilty plea on Kohberger's behalf for every charge. The decision to stand silent is a highly unusual legal maneuver that many defendants and even some local attorneys do not realize is an option. Its use in this case highlighted both Ann Taylor's experience as a criminal defense lawyer and Kohberger's own advanced working knowledge of the criminal justice system. Media and legal commentators suggested 2 primary strategic reasons why a defendant who fully understands the charges might choose to stand silent. One is that it can sometimes indicate that the defense and prosecution are actively negotiating a plea agreement. However, observers at the time doubted this was the case for Kohberger, with many assuming he was instead seeking his moment of fame. And 2, in highly publicized trials, a defendant might stand silent to avoid inciting further public outrage by explicitly declaring the words, "not guilty." Commentators noted this nuance is typically utilized only by defendants who care deeply about the PR ramifications of their proceedings. This aligned with reports that Kohberger was highly invested in his public image and frequently watched TV coverage of his own case from his jail cell. The victims' families and friends, meanwhile, marked Maddie Mogen's birthday by completing random acts of kindness in her honor, establishing what they called Maddie May Day as an annual tradition. June brought the Latah County Prosecutor's Office's official announcement that it was seeking the death penalty. The summer that followed was quieter but no less significant. Jim and Stacy Chapin traveled to a UI campus building where Dean Blaine Eccles had safely staged the victim's belongings removed from 1122 King Road, and the Chapins retrieved Ethan's blood-spattered items, washed his clothes, and packed them away. A hearing that August addressed the defense's request for discovery related to the investigative genetic genealogy methodology used to build Kohberger's family tree, with Taylor calling 3 expert witnesses to challenge the science, before Kohberger officially waived his right to a speedy trial. As fall arrived, the FBI re-entered 1122 King Road on Halloween to create a new 3D map of the crime scene for trial. The one-year anniversary of the murders in mid-November was marked in starkly different ways by the families. The Chapins hosted a private black tie gala at a wine shop in LaConner, Washington, raising money for the Ethan Smile Foundation and welcoming Moscow Police Chief James Fry as a guest, while the Goncalves family spent the day giving television interviews expressing intense frustration with the slow legal process and criticizing the judge for allowing Kohberger to appear in court in a business suit. Then, just after Christmas, despite protests and a public plea from the Goncalves family to preserve the crime scene until trial, the University of Idaho demolished 1122 King Road. The new year brought fresh legal frustrations. A late February hearing to set a trial date stalled completely, with Judge John Judge and Prosecutor Thompson aiming for March 2025, while Taylor aggressively pushed back, arguing she had not yet received all discovery from the FBI and no date was set. Spring unfolded with a series of milestones, both legal and personal. Moscow Police Chief James Fry retired after 31 years of service, with Captain Anthony Dollinger stepping in as his replacement. A subsequent hearing on a motion to compel discovery devolved into an attack on the probable cause affidavit, with Taylor questioning investigator Brett Payne about video surveillance and using a cell phone data analyst to highlight missing location data from Kohberger's phone, a development that deeply frustrated the Goncalves family. June brought a brighter moment with the inaugural Make It Pink Gala for the Made with Kindness nonprofit in Post Falls, attended by the Goncalves family and Dean Blaine Eccles, who drove 90 minutes to surprise them and show the university's continued support. That same summer, in a telling encounter at a Pennsylvania Rite Aid, Connie Saba, mother of Kohberger's late childhood friend, ran into Michael Kohberger, who insisted his son had been framed, claiming the knife sheath was planted, and that Brian had simply been driving around that night because he couldn't sleep. August closed out the season with the dedication of the Vandal Healing Garden and Memorial on the UI campus, with representatives from all 4 victims' families in attendance, the first time they had all been together in Moscow since the tragedy. Weeks later, a 6-hour hearing examined whether the trial should be moved out of Latah County, with Taylor arguing the local community was too prejudiced by media coverage to seat a fair jury, while Steve Goncalves felt strongly that the trial should remain local. The answer came in early September when Judge John Judge issued a written decision granting the change of venue, and the Idaho Supreme Court ordered the trial moved 300 miles south to Ada County in Boise, assigning District Judge Stephen Hippler to preside. Kohberger was flown from Moscow to Boise and booked into the Ada County Jail, a well-timed transfer, as it later emerged that the Latah County Jail had failed fire and code regulations and faced potential shutdown. Facing the prospect of spending 3 months in Boise for the trial, the Goncalves family launched a GoFundMe page to cover housing, food, and travel expenses. On October 9, 2024, Judge Hippler officially established the trial timeline, tentatively setting jury selection to begin on August 4, 2025, and the jury trial itself to commence on August 18, 2025. The scheduled trial never took place. On June 27th, the judge rejected Brian Kohberger's request to present theories regarding 4 alternate perpetrators. Shortly after, it was announced that Kohberger had agreed to a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. As part of the agreement, he gave up his right to any future appeals, guaranteeing he would remain in prison until he died. On July 2, 2025, Kohberger formally pleaded guilty to all 5 charges, 4 counts of first-degree murder, and 1 count of felony burglary. Koberger's parents, Michael and Mary Ann, attended the sentencing, with his mother sobbing in the front row. The sentencing hearing occurred on July 23rd. During the proceedings, the victims' family members were given the opportunity to address the court and unloaded their anger on Koberger, with one family member calling him a demon from hell and another calling him dumb as they come, stupid, clumsy, slow, sloppy, weak, dirty. Judge Hippler stated that he could not discern any redeeming qualities in the defendant because his grotesque acts of evil have buried and hidden anything that might have been good or intrinsically human about him. By the time the actual sentencing hearing took place in late July, Koberger's father, Michael, had developed heart problems. Brian's sister, Mel, stayed home in Pennsylvania to care for him, and the two of them watched the sentencing hearing together on television. Koberger sat through the hearing in blank-faced silence, with his hands in his lap, looking at a piece of paper with a small drawing on it. He was formally sentenced to 4 consecutive life sentences in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 10 years for the burglary charge. He was also ordered to pay fines and restitution, totaling $270,000. On November 19, 2025, Como News reported that the Goncalves family was planning to sue Washington State University. The family sought accountability and transparency regarding Koberger's problematic behavior and conduct while employed as a teaching assistant at the university prior to the murders. Quick break. Ads keep the show running, but if you want to skip them, the ad-free version's on Patreon for just $3 a month. Links in the show notes. And we're back. Thanks for sticking through that. Let's get back to it. In January 2026, Mel Koberger broke her family's 3-year silence in an exclusive interview with the New York Times. She explained that the family had stayed quiet to respect the victims' families and out of fear that speaking might further traumatize them. In the interview, she detailed the collateral infamy the family endured and provided insights into Brian's life before and after the murders. When the murders occurred in November 2022, Mel recalled being alarmed because Brian lived so close to the scene and often went on late-night jogs. She explicitly warned him, "Brian, you are running outside, and this psycho killer is on the loose. Be careful," to which he assured her he would stay safe. When her sister Amanda later called to tell her the FBI had arrested Brian for the crimes, Mel briefly thought it was a prank before a sense of nausea overtook her. She stated firmly, "If I ever had a reason to believe my brother did anything, I would have turned him in." In the days leading up to the December 30th SWAT raid, the family gathered for Christmas in Pennsylvania. Mel recalled hugging Brian tightly and noting that he seemed normal. They played TV party games, their mother baked him vegan cookies, and he even carefully bandaged Mel's finger when she cut it on foil, despite his usual disgust at the sight of blood. During this trip, Brian only briefly mentioned the Idaho murders, noting that investigators were still hunting for the killer. She noted that while he could be socially awkward and abrasive, she never saw him be violent. The arrest completely upended their lives. Tabloids camped outside their home, and internet sleuths heavily scrutinized them, even bringing up Amanda's role in a 2011 horror film. Mel had to abandon a new job as a mental health counselor because her employer was flooded with inquiries, and someone even published a book on Amazon falsely using her name. Mel described the experience as painful. It's like being victimized but not really being a victim. She expressed deep grief for the victims' families, noting that during the holidays, the thought of the pain those families endured brought her to tears. Mel clarified a massive online misconception regarding the sentencing hearing. The drawing Koberger was seen holding in court, which internet sleuths and tabloids speculated was a dark heart or a creepy drawing, was actually a heart surrounded by vibrant colors that Mel had drawn for him so he would know he was loved, even though she couldn't attend in person. The family continues to support him and holds regular phone calls with him in prison, though they actively avoid discussing the details of the case. Instead, they talk about life at home and his ongoing interests in psychology. For his recent birthday, he asked his family to make a cake his sister Amanda would like, and he asked Mel to blow out the candles. To honor their time and dedication as students, the University of Idaho awarded posthumous degrees to Kaylee, Maddie, Xana, and Ethan during the spring commencement ceremonies on May 13, 2023.